The air on the night of August 20th, 1942, was less a current and more a physical weight, thick with the smell of moldering decay and rank seawater. Two forces, fundamentally incompatible in their military philosophy, were about to collide on a narrow 20-yard strip of black, volcanic sand at the mouth of the Tenaru River. On one side stood the Imperial Japanese Army's elite Ichiki Detachment, precisely 917 men strong, led by Colonel Kuniaki Kanae. They were the embodiment of Japanese victory, their hands still bearing the confident dust of unchallenged campaigns in China. Kanae carried not only the weight of his rank, but the immense psychological burden of Yamato Damashi, the unwavering Japanese spirit which guaranteed victory over any foe, particularly one perceived as soft and decadent. Their objective was the complete and utter annihilation of the American perimeter in a single, terrifying nocturnal action. High Command had assured them the opposition was a mere 2,000-man rabble of Marines, a gross and fatal underestimate of the 11,000 determined men of the 1st Marine Division dug in on the periphery of Henderson Field. As they began their final movement, the sound of the Pacific surf provided a misleading rhythm to their silent advance. But this was not to be a glorious bayonet charge into a fleeing enemy. As the devastating truth would be recorded in the terse, increasingly desperate entries of Lieutenant Genjiro Imi's diary, they were marching directly into a technical and tactical trap, a pre-sighted killing zone that would not merely repel them, but vaporize the very notion of spiritual superiority in war. The jungle was about to reveal its true masters, not the brave, but the prepared, the logistically superior, and the technologically coordinated. The central existential challenge facing Major General Alexander Vandegrift's Marines was to establish not just a beachhead, but a psychological firewall. The American invasion of Guadalcanal, Operation Watchtower, had been an act of extreme strategic audacity, seizing an airbase hundreds of miles from any stable supply line. Their immediate perimeter was a 3-mile coastal crescent, choked by the razor-sharp kunai grass and bisected by disease-ridden streams. Tactically, the problem was defined by the Japanese doctrine of the Banzai charge. This was not a disorderly rush. It was a disciplined, coordinated infantry assault designed to achieve a breakthrough through overwhelming speed and shock, often under the cover of darkness. Existing U.S. doctrine for a frontal assault typically relied on dispersed rifle fire and a staggered defense. Against the Japanese, this was insufficient. An anecdote from initial skirmishes, where Marines found themselves momentarily paralyzed by the sheer terror of screaming, charging men who seemed impervious to single rifle rounds, illustrated the danger. A Japanese veteran driven by Bushido would continue to press the attack even when grievously wounded, posing a threat until physically stopped. Vandegrift needed a method to not just halt the charge, but to pulverize its momentum instantly and totally, preventing the psychological shock from taking hold. The existing rifle squad's capacity to deliver suppressive fire was inadequate. The standard Browning automatic rifle, BAR, while offering 650 rounds per minute cycling rate, had a small 20-round magazine and overheated quickly, making sustained defensive action difficult. They needed sustained, overwhelming volume of fire, not simply scattered small arms. The survival of the entire Marine Division depended on solving this precise, terrifying problem of a charging, fanatical enemy. The ultimate countermeasure deployed at the Tenaru was a comprehensive, mutually supporting system of heavy weapons designed to create an interlocking web of annihilation. The star of this system was the venerable but highly effective M1917A1 Browning heavy machine gun. The comparison with the Japanese equivalent illustrates the core imbalance. The Japanese Type 92 heavy machine gun, nicknamed the Woodpecker for its slow, distinctive sound, was air-cooled, which was simpler but limited its sustained rate of fire. It operated on a rigid 30-round brass strip feed, which, combined with the extreme 90% humidity of the jungle, frequently led to stoppages and a limited practical firing window. Its typical cyclic rate was 450 rounds, 50 rounds per minute. The American M1917A1, by contrast, was a masterpiece of sustained combat. It used a water-cooled jacket that required approximately 7 pints of water to function, adding a significant weight penalty of over 93 kilograms when mounted, but the trade-off was invaluable. The water jacket allowed the gunner to fire at its maximum cyclic rate of 450 to 600 rounds per minute for hours, without degradation. Furthermore, it fed from a 250-round cloth belt, minimizing the time the gun was silent. At the Tenaru, these guns were sighted in carefully overlapping arcs. The lines of fire were so meticulously planned that if one gun faltered, the adjacent two guns could still cover the gap with an unbroken, continuous volume of 0.30 caliber fire. The most decisive technological component, however, was the integration of 37mm M3 anti-tank guns firing canister ammunition. The 37mm gun was rapidly becoming obsolete against German and Japanese tanks, but it found a fearsome second life as an anti-personnel weapon. The canister round, or M16 canister shot, was an explosive-free shell packed with 122 individual steel balls, or slugs, approximately 0.40 inches in diameter. Fired at close range into a dense group of charging men, it functioned as a massive high-velocity shotgun blast. The muzzle velocity, roughly 1,500 feet per second, ensured that at 50 yards, the projectile cloud was utterly devastating. This was the ultimate non-spiritual answer to the Banzai charge, a technical device that converted human wave momentum into catastrophic, instantaneous loss. The men responsible for this tactical conversion were a cohort of seasoned, pragmatic professionals who saw war as a problem of logistics, engineering, and sustained violence. Major General Alexander Vandegrift, the division commander, was known less for fiery rhetoric and more for calm, disciplined foresight. A Virginian with a measured demeanor, he was the steady hand that demanded meticulous planning. He understood that his Marines were cut off and that the only true defense was a devastating offense delivered from behind fixed defenses. The more colorful and perhaps more crucial figures were his field commanders. Colonel Merritt A. Red Mike Edson, soon to be immortalized for his actions at the ridge that would bear his name, was a former rifle instructor and a veteran of the Banana Wars in Central America. Having earned the Medal of Honor in Nicaragua in 1928, Edson possessed an almost unsettling calmness and a deep, analytical mind. He studied the enemy and was ruthless in his preparation, constantly moving his men to preempt counterattacks. He was the master of pre-registration, ensuring every inch of a potential breakthrough zone was covered by both machine guns and artillery. Then there was the man who defined Marine Corps' aggression for a generation, Lieutenant Colonel Louis B. Chesty Puller. Puller was less of a planner and more of a force of nature, driven by an unyielding focus on combined arms. His skill lay in demanding and efficiently coordinating supporting fire, especially heavy naval gunfire and artillery, to smash enemy concentrations before they could close. These leaders, though distinct in personality, shared an institutional genius. They adapted American industrial and technical superiority, the endless supply of ammunition, the reliable radios, the robust artillery, to defeat a foe who relied primarily on the individual soldier's outdated courage. The process of fabricating the Tenaru defense line over the 2 weeks following the landing was an intensive, non-stop application of military engineering and forward thinking. The Marines were effectively creating a linear fortress with extremely limited materials, site selection, and clearance. Recognizing the sandbar and river mouth as the only viable Japanese avenue of attack from the east, they chose this 800-yard section. Pioneer battalions, battling crippling heat, first attacked the vegetation, clearing a wide, unobstructed field of fire 150 to 200 yards deep. Every clump of kunai grass that could offer cover was cut, burned, or trampled, leaving the attackers exposed. Emplacement construction. The machine gun nests were not hastily dug holes. They were mutually supporting fighting positions, often reinforced with coconut logs and sandbags made of volcanic soil and coral. The placement was the key. Each M1917A1 was positioned to allow its stream of tracers to interlace with those of its neighbors. This was done physically. Gunners would align their weapons to a fixed point in the distance, ensuring there were no soft spots in the curtain of fire. Integrating artillery. The crucial step was the integration of fire direction control, FDC. Simple rubber-coated WD-1 field telephone wire was laid, connecting forward observers in the line to the batteries of 75mm pack howitzers and 105mm guns several hundred yards back. Before the battle, the Marine artillerymen fired test rounds onto the center of the sandbar, recording the precise coordinates for 75mm, 35mm HE high explosive and shrapnel rounds. The 37mm anti-tank gun was moved into a forward position, its canister rounds placed in immediate readiness. The entire defense was meticulously designed to funnel the enemy into these pre-sighted, inescapable kill zones, transforming the act of charging into a guaranteed act of annihilation. The structure was a testament to the belief that preparation, not bravado, saves lives. By the evening of August 20th, the atmosphere was electric. The Marines knew a major attack was imminent. Japanese reconnaissance patrols had been aggressive, and their probing action suggested a full-scale assault. Vandegrift and his staff had communicated a clear strategic message: hold the line at all costs. The fate of the entire Pacific campaign, the reputation of the Marine Corps, and the security of the vital airstrip, which allowed the Cactus Air Force to operate, rested on their shoulders. For Colonel Kanae, the mindset was one of assured victory. He had been explicitly briefed that the U.S. forces were unprepared and would break and run once faced with the fierce, close-quarters charge. This cultural overestimation of their own spiritual strength, coupled with a catastrophic failure of intelligence, led to a plan that was tactically suicidal: a frontal, concentrated assault across the most predictable and heavily fortified part of the line. The Japanese troops, having eaten their last planned meal of rice and fish, began their approach through the deep shadows, buoyed by the belief that their discipline and bayonets were superior to any machine the Americans could muster. They moved with the silent professionalism of veterans, unaware that every step they took was placing them deeper inside a perfectly calibrated multi-layered trap. The attack began just after midnight. The initial probe was met with selective rifle fire, drawing the Ichiki detachment forward. Then, the silence was ripped apart. The Americans held their fire until the first ranks were within effective range of their barbed wire and the fixed arcs of the machine guns. When the signal was given, the entire front erupted. The sound was not the popping of a skirmish, but the sustained, ripping roar of machinery tearing through flesh. The M1917A1s hammered away, the vapor from their heated water jackets billowing like spectral steam in the humid night air. The continuous stream of 0.30 caliber projectiles created a tangible, visible sheet of fire across the sandbar. The Japanese soldiers, screaming their Banzai cries, were caught instantly in the lethal crossfire. Men were literally knocked off their feet, their momentum stopped instantly by the sheer kinetic energy of the continuous barrage. The situation became a desperate, terrifying logjam. The rear ranks of the Japanese force, driven forward by their officers and the doctrine of never retreating, piled up against the rapidly mounting heaps of their dead and wounded comrades. It was no longer an attack, it was mass execution. Then came the final, systemic blow. On the flank, a Marine lieutenant, his face blackened with camouflage paint, his ears ringing from the chaos, shouted into the field phone. "Fire for effect! Canister! Fire for effect!" The 37mm gun barked. The sound of the canister round was unlike the heavy thump of the HE shell. It was a devastating, close-range splatter shred. The cloud of 122 steel balls swept across the sandbar, turning tightly packed groups of soldiers into a bloody spray. One eyewitness Marine later described it as like hitting a sack full of walnuts with a sledgehammer. Colonel Kanae himself was among the dead, cut down by the relentless fire as he attempted to rally his disintegrating command. By 4:30 a.m., the attack had utterly failed. The silence that returned was thick and horrifying, broken only by the whimpering of the few Japanese wounded who survived. The sandbar, once a neutral piece of terrain, was now a monument to material superiority. Over 800 Japanese were killed or mortally wounded. The Marine losses were a staggering indictment of the Japanese plan. 40 killed and fewer than 100 wounded. The psychological firewall had held, delivering a categorical physical blow to the myth of Imperial invincibility. The defeat at the Tenaru, while tactically stunning, was strategically ignored by Tokyo, who immediately escalated the commitment, unleashing the constant nighttime resupply runs known as the Tokyo Express. This phase of the battle exposed the true, long-term legacy of Guadalcanal, the fatal logistical disconnect between the two sides. The Japanese could only utilize destroyers, which limited their resupply to light infantry, ammunition, and minimal provisions. Consequently, the follow-up forces, like Major General Kiyotake Kawaguchi's 5,000-strong brigade, were forced to march through the sodden, malaria-infested interior. Their inability to transport heavy guns, tanks, or sustained rations condemned them to a campaign of attrition, while the Marines received constant resupply, including canned chow, fresh water, and plasma. The Japanese soldiers faced an exponential decline in combat effectiveness. The statistics are grim-proof. Japanese units suffered a 60% disease rate from malaria, dysentery, and dengue fever, turning their battalions into walking ghost formations. Their already meager rations dwindled to a single rice ball per day, forcing them to forage in a jungle that offered only disease. The American soldier, meanwhile, was operating at a sustainable loss rate. The pattern repeated itself at Edson's Ridge in mid-September, where Merritt Edson and his 840 raiders and paratroopers defeated a 5,000-man infiltration attack. Edson's genius was not just in courage, but in coordinating 2,000 shells of pre-registered artillery fire, crushing breakthroughs the moment they occurred. And in October, Lieutenant General Harukichi Hayakutake's final major push was similarly broken by Chesty Puller's 7th Marines, who used danger-close 105mm howitzer fire and offshore naval barrages to turn the jungle into a charnel house, costing the Japanese 2,000 more lives. The Japanese diaries wept not just of death, but of utter, shattering disillusionment. They recorded that Americans didn't panic, they didn't flee, and they had an inexhaustible supply of machine gun bullets. By the end of the year, with 25,000, 30,000 Japanese deaths from combat and non-combat causes against America's sustainable 7,000, Imperial HQ finally admitted defeat. Operation Key, the miraculous evacuation of 10,652 skeletal survivors in February 1943, was the final, devastating confirmation. Logistics, systems, and material might had crushed the myth of the unbreakable warrior. Guadalcanal's legacy extends far beyond the tactical turning point of the Pacific War. It represents the moment where the industrial age definitively triumphed over the feudal spirit in the context of modern warfare. The island became a chilling case study in the ultimate limitation of courage. The Japanese soldiers' dedication, discipline, and willingness to die for the Emperor were absolute. Their courage was not a failure, but this spirit was placed in the hands of a logistics system that failed to deliver heavy guns, failed to manage tropical disease, and failed to feed its men. The individual Japanese soldier, armed with an outdated rifle, could not compete with the organized American response, the M1 Garand, capable of 50 rounds per minute, the water-cooled machine guns firing for hours on end, and the ceaseless resupply of ammunition and plasma. The lesson etched in the sand of the Tenaru and the coral of Edson's Ridge was stark. Systems defeat individuals. The courage of a lone Marine like Sergeant John Basiloni fighting for 3 continuous days was monumental, but that courage was only made possible by the factory system back home, churning out the thousands of rounds of ammunition and the reliable machine that he needed to stand his ground. Guadalcanal proved that in the crucibles of modern war, the spirit can be broken, and the war is written not by the warrior's oath, but by the endless material churn of the industrial colossus that stands behind him.